Hey everybody, welcome back to Play the Game HQ. I'm Daniel and this is Lairs. Lairs is a two-player head-to-head dungeon design, dungeon crawling game. It's coming to Kickstarter from KTBG, who helped sponsor this video. And this is a prototype, so everything you see here is subject to change. Some of the art may be updated, and there will be new unlockable content that we don't have here to preview that will be included in the final edition of the game. Now, this game is essentially dungeon battleship. So if you played Battleship growing up and you enjoyed that type of game, the secret design and layout and then trying to figure out what the other player is doing, this is going to bring back a lot of that nostalgic feeling. At least it did for me. So in Lairs, each player is going to have their own dungeon board and then their own map that they're going to be filling out as they explore the dungeon that the other player has designed. So the game starts out with both players designing a dungeon on their dual layer board. These walls slot in so that they're nice and secure. And you're going to spend a few minutes laying out your dungeon. This will be behind the screen here so the other player can't see it. And you're going to lay out your dungeon, and a proper dungeon is made up of 20 walls with 3 treasure chests, 3 monsters, and 3 traps. Now, the base game has the same monster. It's always the hungry blob, and the same trap, which is the greased pit. And then the treasure is made up of these cards that you're going to be drawing randomly from the deck and laying out into the market. But there is also going to be unlockable content, which I'll show you in just a minute, that is going to add in new monsters, new abilities, new things that you can do, and just kind of add some variety to the game, add the ability for you to kind of customize your strategy as you get comfortable with the game and what you can do in it. So as you're designing your dungeon at the start of the game, there's a few rules you have to follow. First, you cannot fully block off any part of the map. You have to have every single square of the map accessible. And second, each treasure chest and the exit has to be accessible through at least one path that goes through no more than 1 monster and 1 trap. It's fine if there's multiple paths and multiple ways to get there that go through lots of monsters and traps, but there has to be at least one route through your dungeon that gets to each treasure chest and each map without going through more than 1 monster and 1 trap. Other than that, you want to make your dungeon as confusing as possible, as treacherous as possible, so that you can find the other player's treasure, fight their monsters, and get to their exit in their dungeon quickest. Now, what you're going to have during the game is the dungeon that you design, and then a map sheet that is going to be used to explore the other player's dungeon. So right now, what I have in front of me is a map sheet that is exploring this dungeon. In a regular game, I would have my dungeon and a map sheet with a different colored meeple or a different colored explorer that is exploring and laying out the other player's dungeon, but that would be really confusing here if I wasn't showing you how to explore the dungeon that you can see. But just know that as I go through this and I explain what I'm doing and kind of how the actions work, that I would actually be exploring on a map that is for a dungeon that I cannot see. So again, each player is going to have their own dungeon and a map they're filling out for the other player's dungeon. Once you have your dungeons built, whoever finished their dungeon first is going to choose which player goes first. And on your turn, you're going to be spending cubes to take actions to explore the other player's dungeon, which again is hidden behind a player shield, so you're not actually able to see it as you're exploring it. You're going to tell them where you want to go, and they're going to relay the information to you of what is there. Now, there's 4 different actions you can take using these cubes. You can creep, you can hustle, you can backtrack, and you can peer. Creep is the most basic action. It just means to move into an adjacent space, whether it's known or unknown, whether you've been there before or not been there before, you're just going to move into that space. And if you haven't been there before, if you don't know what's there, whatever is there is going to be revealed to you as you move into that space. Now, at the beginning of your turn, you're going to move all of your cubes 1 space to the left. They're going to start in the spent space so that they can move over and you follow the same sequence every turn of the game rather than the whole skip this step during the first round. So once they are in the fresh space, you can spend those cubes into the spent space to take actions. So the most basic action that you can take is a creep, and that costs 1 cube, and that is just moving into an adjacent space. When you move into a space, the other player is going to tell you what's there. They're going to tell you what walls are around you, and then if any treasures, monsters, or traps are in that space. At the beginning of the game, on your very first turn, they're going to tell you where you're starting. So on this game, I have this a few turns in, but at the beginning of the game, I would say, okay, where am I? And the other player would say, you're going to start, the starting square is on E2. So I would circle E2 every time you move into another square or discover what's in a square, you're going to circle it so that that square becomes known. And then you're going to write what's in it using these symbols at the bottom of your map. So we started here and then we crept into these different spaces. So when you creep into a space, again, the other player is going to tell you what's there. So when we crept from the starting space into D2, the other player would say there's nothing there. There's no walls around you and there's nothing in that space. And then we say, okay, I want to creep into D3. And again, this has already been done here. That's why these are already filled in. But I would say I want to creep into D3, and the other player would say, okay, there is a wall to your south and a wall to your east. You would fill those in, and then we're going to creep into C4. We're going to spin another cube, and then there's a wall to your east and a wall to your north, and then we're going to creep into C2, and there is a wall to your north. And then you can use the peer action if you want to. And these colored cubes can be used for special actions, or they can be used as a basic cube. You can also take a peer and a hustle action, which these cubes can do. The yellow cube can do a hustle action for 1 cube. The green cube can peer for 1 cube, or you can spend 2 white cubes to take those advanced actions. But if I am right here in C2 and I want to peer into C1, I would spend a green cube and then say I'm peering into C1. I'm not moving into it. I have the option to after I peer, but initially I just want to peer into C1. And the other player would say there are no walls around you, but there is a monster in that square. So I'm going to mark that right here, that there's a monster. That's a square right there. I'm going to mark that there's a monster in that space, and then I get to choose whether I want to move into that space or not move into it. Now with traps and monsters, if you move into their space and you don't know that they're there, they're immediately going to hit you, and you're going to take the penalty, which is to fatigue any 2 cubes if it's a monster, and to fatigue 2 fresh cubes if it's a trap. So let's say that I didn't peer. Let's say that I just wanted to move into this space. I moved into this space with a monster. I am now in a space with a monster. I would still get that information from the other player. There's no walls around you, but there's a monster there, and I would fatigue any 2 cubes. So I would obviously fatigue my basic cubes. Those go into the fatigue space, and then when I move everything to the left at the beginning of my next turn, they're not going to be available to use because instead of moving from spent to fresh, they're going to move into the spent space, and I will have to wait a whole other turn to get those cubes to use. Now, I may want to stop right here, but I do have 1 cube left, which lets me use the conserve action. I can conserve a cube by moving it over into that conserve space, and then that cube is available to use essentially twice on my next turn. When you use a cube, you always move it 1 space to the right, regardless of where it is. So I move from conserve to fresh, and I can take an action with that yellow cube, and then once I'm done with that, I can move it again from fresh to spent. Now, I didn't move everything over as if I had started a new turn, but that would be at the beginning of my next turn. When this is there, everything is going to move to the left, and now I will spend these into my spent square, and I will move that into my fresh square, and then again into my spent square the second time I take it. So we covered creeping and peering, and you can also hustle, which is to take 3 creep actions back to back to back until you either get to the end of those 3 actions or you enter a square that is not empty. So if I was, say I was on E1 and I wanted to hustle, I could say, okay, I'm going to hustle into D1. The other player would say there's nothing in that space. And then I'm going to hustle into C1, and they would say there's a monster there. I'm going to fatigue any 2 cubes, and I have to stop because I have now moved into a space that is not empty, and my hustle ends immediately when I move into a non-empty space. Now, the last action you can do is to backtrack, and that is the one action in the base game that can't be done with 2 white cubes, but can only be done by spending 1 yellow cube. And that allows you to move through any number of known squares to any known squares as long as you're only moving through empty squares. So let's say I was all the way up here and I had explored all of these squares, but I left that monster there when I moved through that space. I could move back all the way to that monster space, but I couldn't move through it because that is not an empty square. But if I had defeated that monster and that monster was gone, with 1 backtrack action, again, assuming that all of these were explored and known, I could move all the way back to the starting space with 1 single backtrack action. So players are going to take turns spending as many cubes as they want, taking as many actions as they can until they're all spent, or they conserve up to 3 cubes at the end of their turn. And they're going to go back and forth, taking turns and exploring the other player's dungeon until they are ready to leave and obviously find the exit. Now here the exit is hidden away in this little corridor over here, but just finding the exit isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because in order to leave legally, you have to either defeat 3 monsters, find 3 treasures, or do 2 of each. If you find the exit, that's great. You can always backtrack to it. But if you haven't found the treasure and the monsters you need, then you can't legally leave until you do those things, even if you have found the exit. So let's talk about fighting monsters. When you find a monster, you have the option to find it. And same with a trap, you have the option to disarm it. Some treasures give you points for traps that you have disarmed. Otherwise, you don't get points for disarming traps, but you do get points for fighting monsters. You get 2 points for the second monster that you defeat and 4 points for the third monster that you defeat. So in order to fight something, you have to spend cubes for dice. The monster and the trap both show their health. So the Hungry Blob has 6 health. The Greased Pit has 5 health. So I'm going to spend 3 cubes for 3 dice, and I'm going to fight this Hungry Blob. I got 7 points. That defeats the Hungry Blob, and this now goes on my player mat, and I am 1 step closer to being able to exit once I find the exit. Disarming a trap works the same way, except if you don't defeat it, it's going to hit you again, but then it goes away. It doesn't stay on the board until it gets defeated. With the Hungry Blob, let's say that I had rolled 5 instead of 6. Then I would mark on here that I hit at 5, so it has 1 health left. And then when I fight it again, I only have to get 1 instead of having to get 6. So you can fight a monster, weaken it, and come back to it if you're not able to defeat it on the first go. With the treasure, once you reveal a treasure chest, you get to pick from the market of the treasure that you want. Again, there's a maximum of 3 treasures available with the 3 treasure chests on the map. And those are just like, they all do different things. They all typically have a base victory point score. I believe there are a couple that don't have a base victory point value. They will score based on other things that you get. But most of them have a base victory point value, and then they score based on the other treasures that you get. So the Moon Shard is worth 1 point. It's worth 2 points if I have a different diamond treasure item, and 1 additional point if I have an identical treasure item. So if I have 2 Moon Shards and another diamond treasure, this would be worth 4 points. 1 for the base, 2 for the different diamond, and then 1 for the identical diamond treasure. So those are how the treasures score. Again, they're based on their base value and then other treasures that you have that increase the value of the individual treasures. And that is why it's optional to open a treasure chest. Let's say that I got this Moon Shard and then I found the other treasure chest, but this is all that was left, or there wasn't another diamond available. I may say I'm going to leave that treasure chest there and come back to it later once some other treasure is available. Once something, maybe the other player reveals a few things, they find all of their treasure chests, and now there's another Moon Shard. Well, now I can backtrack to that treasure chest and get that other Moon Shard so that I'm scoring more points, because ultimately points are what win you the game. Even if you're the first to exit, you do get 4 points for being the first to exit, but you win the game by having the most points. So once you have become eligible to exit, again, by either finding 3 treasures, defeating 3 monsters, or doing 2 of each of those, you get to the exit and you choose to leave. If you're the first to exit, you get 4 points. And once someone exits, the other player gets 1 more full turn and then the game is over. If the other player exits on their last turn, then they get 2 points, and then everyone tallies up their points and the game ends, and whoever has the most points wins. If it's a tie, then the player who exited first wins. So that is the base game of Lairs. There is 1 monster, there is 1 trap, and then there's a whole deck of treasures, and you have your base cubes, the Pier Cube, and the Hustle Cube. And again, it is a very basic game, but it is enough to get you in and get you a good feel for the game. Once you have a good feel for that, there's going to be unlockable content that will allow you to do new things. Now, they don't really want us to show much of it, but we can describe it. So I have the boxes here. This is not all that's going to be included in the game, but this is just a sample that they sent for us to look at. So we have 2 boxes here and 2 envelopes. We have envelope A and B and box 1 and 2. Now, this additional content is going to, if you look at the player screen, you'll notice that there are these shiny spots that are set up to have other things added to them. All of that is going to fill out with the unlockable content. So right now, where you have your basic actions and the Pier and the Hustle actions, you're going to get new cubes that allow you to unlock additional abilities. And then you are also, with some of the unlockable content, going to get the option or the ability to refine the cubes that you have, to trade out some cubes, to unlock new things, so that you can really refine your skill set based on how you choose to play the game. There are also going to be new monsters and new traps that are unlocked that are going to do different things. They'll be stronger. They'll have different They'll have different penalties as you fight them and get hit by them, but it's all just to expand on and create more strategy within the game as you play. So again, I'm not supposed to show much of this, but we are going to open this and kind of show you what's inside some of these boxes. So this is box 1. So inside we have this whole other deck of small cards. We have a new monster. We have new cubes. And these are very cool looking new monster meeples that will replace some of your hungry blobs as you play through the game. So these monsters, each of these monsters will replace one of the hungry blobs in each of the dungeons. And then we have these stickers that are going to go onto your player screen to add to your abilities. In box 2, we have even more cool stuff. We have more monsters, and we have more dice, and we have more cubes. These cubes are going to give you different abilities. Again, these are going to be the things that are going to let you switch out what you do to improve upon your basic abilities and kind of refine and customize the actions you can take as you play the game. So we have all these different cubes. We have these cool looking monsters right here. Those are really awesome looking. We have new stickers that go on for the dice area to tell you what the new dice do. Just really cool looking stuff. Again, improving on and making stronger versions of the monsters that are there and introducing even stronger monsters to fight. So that is box 2. You can see those are really cool looking monsters. A lot of new abilities that you're going to unlock. And let's look at these envelopes, because the envelopes, obviously, they're not going to have cubes and stuff in them, but they do have, and they tell you when to open them. So envelope A, you're not going to open until you open box 1. But these are going to be cards and new abilities. We have a new trap and we have a new ability that we're going to be putting on our player screen, and then a new trap token to replace the trap tokens that you have at the beginning. And then in envelope B, let's see what we have here. We have even more of these small card items that we saw in box A, and then even more stickers to go on our player screen. So all of this unlockable content is just going to add to the base game. It's going to add to the strategy that you're going to use. It's going to allow you to move into a more customized strategy to really attack the other player's dungeon in the way that you prefer to, instead of just being stuck with these 4 basic cubes and the 2 advanced cubes. You're going to be able to eventually swap some things out, make some customizations, and really play the game as you want to play it, just based on your playing style. So this is Lairs. It is a battleship vibe brought into the modern gaming era. It is coming to Kickstarter, so we'll leave a link to that Kickstarter below. If you have any questions at all, leave us a comment and we'll answer it as quick as we can. If we can't answer it, we'll send it along to the publisher so they can come and answer those questions for you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.